In this video, we're demonstrating how to set up for plastic engraving. So the first thing you'll notice is we have a vacuum foot with our vacuum hose attached to our vacuum system, which is under the table. So this vacuum foot attaches to the micrometer. The vacuum foot is what rides on the material while we're engraving. So as it rides, it pushes up on the spindle, which activates the proximity sensor, telling the machine that it's all the way down. So one of the first things we need to do here to get this to work properly is we have to do what's called zeroing a cutter and then setting our cutter depth, because it's important exactly the right distance to have the cutter hanging down below this foot, because if the cutter is exactly even with the foot, it's not going to engrave. If it's too deep, it's going to be engraving into the table. So we have to have the right depth here. So we're going to talk about how we do that. So the first step is we need to zero our cutter, and actually the very first step is we need to have our micrometer in the right position to zero our cutter. So let's talk about that real quick. The micrometer on this machine, every one of these dimples that's in this micrometer that's captured with this, some of you have the old Xenotech just a little tab that clicks as you click it around. Each one of these is a thousandth. So if I click this 5 times, then I'm moving this foot in relation to the cutter. It's actually the foot that's moving up and down. The micrometer is moving up and down. All of the spindle and the block and the cutter itself stay in the same position. We're screwing and unscrewing this micrometer and moving it up and down. So if I move the micrometer up, tighten it, and move up five clicks, then the cutter's hanging down 5 thousandths. For this material, I'm going to have the cutter hanging down 10 thousandths. This is not a super thick cap. Some materials you need to go 15 or even more thousandths to get through some of the very thick caps that are on some of these materials. So I need to zero the cutter so that then I can set it for that proper depth. So this is a flex cutter for doing plastics. This happens to be a 10,000th cutter. So I drop this in, tighten it into our spindle, so it's nice and snug. Okay, right now, my cutter, I can't even feel it in there. It's way up, and be careful when you touch these because they can cut you. So it's way up. So I need to drop it down so that it is exactly flush. So take a piece of metal. You don't want to use anything soft. You want to use something hard like metal, because when that cutter drops down, it can punch into plastic, and then it's actually deeper than you think it is. So you want to have something hard that it can't go below. So I'm going to put this piece of metal here, and I go to the cutter knob, which is what this brass piece is called, is your cutter knob. I loosen this, and you watch the cutter right here where my thumb was. As I loosen this, it drops, and it's sitting on this piece of metal flush with the bottom of that vacuum foot. So now I tighten it back up. So my cutter is zeroed right now. Right now, it is exactly flush with the bottom, and I can feel it. It's exactly flush with the bottom of this. So now, put my cutter wrench down. So now, I need to loosen this knob and go from 0 and turn it so that it's tightening up, moving the whole micrometer and the foot up to 10 thousandths, and then tighten this back down. I'm on 10. It's kind of hard to tell with this setup. Okay, so I'm on 10. Okay, so now I have moved this whole foot and micrometer up. The cutter itself and all of the spindle stays in exactly the same location, so a little more of the cutter's hanging down below here now. So I'm at 10 thousandths. Got my cutter in there. Everything's tight and secure, so I can press the play button. We have the machine all set up, ready to go with our cutter depth set properly. Now we come in, we get our artwork together. In this case, I have some text that I arced that's using an engraving font. It's a 6-line font because I'm using a small cutter. There's another reason I'm showing that we'll get into in the settings in a minute. And then I have this cutout line. I'm going to cut out this donut or washer shape. I give the cutout lines a different color because I'm going to be using a different cutter. So I want the machine to engrave the black part, stop, let me change cutters, change the depth of the cutter, and then come back and do the cutout. So this is set up the way I need it to be. Now let me send this over to the EDI. We're going to output to controller. Okay, so this comes into the EDI. I'm going to close this real quick so that we can zoom in using the F11 key. So it's all black right now. It's going to do everything in the same operation. The reason why is I haven't turned on engrave by color yet. So if engrave by color is turned off, it doesn't matter what color your objects are. They're all going to engrave on one plate at one time. So let's go back to our full view. Let me bring up our settings again and turn on engrave by color and apply. Now you see we have the cutout and we have the engrave section. Now I've got this the wrong order in my job, so they came over where that's first and then this is second, and that's not how we're going to engrave this. But that's fine. This video will show how you handle that if you didn't lay it out right. So I want to engrave this part first. It doesn't matter which one I'm in. I can go back to F1, go to color settings, and turn off the red. Say OK, and apply and exit. Now we don't have the arrows to show another operation. It's just the black, and whatever settings we give it, that's what's going to run, and it will not run the red part. So let's go back in here and pull in our settings. So I have settings saved using a 10,000ths cutter to engrave, and we'll look at what everything means here. So we want it to be routing rather than dragging because we need that cutter spinning to remove the material. It's actually a routing bit, so it needs to be running, spinning that cutter to go into the plastic. Cutter mode, we're using full automatic because we're using that vacuum foot to ride on the surface, triggering the procs. So we want that to be set on full automatic. Engrave speed, I have this set really low right now at 0.5. You'll see when we run this, it's not going fast. And the reason is I'm using a very small cutter. I'm using a 10,000ths cutter. And that's because I wanted to get some detail on some smaller text. I wanted to show in the video that it depends on the size cutter you have. The smaller the cutter, the slower you need to go, because even though that spindle is turning 20,000 RPMs when it's maxed out, the tip speed depends on how wide that blade is, and on a very small tip, it's sitting there spinning at that 20,000 RPM. If you go to a much bigger tip, like a 125 instead of a 0.010, you go all the way up to 125 thousandths, then the tip speed is going to be so much faster as it's spinning at 20,000 RPM. It will move a lot more material a lot faster, and you can engrave with it faster. So keep that in mind. The smaller your cutter size is, the slower you need to go here. Traverse speed. It just goes, this is how fast we go between characters. I can go as fast as I want to go. Engrave delay. I have this set to 1/10 of a second. And that's just to allow, when I first plunge into the material, to allow that cutter to start removing material, and then I start moving the XY directions. Resolution, we're leaving that at 4000 to give us the maximum quality. Cutter lift, this is to make sure we don't drag between characters, that we need to be lifting high enough that even if the plastic is a little bit bowed, it lifts and moves as we lift and go to another. We want to make sure we're not dragging that cutter across. Cutter up speed, we can go fast, picking it up. Cutter down speed, I just don't want to slam down into the material, so I've got it set down at 3. Spring pressure, this is to accommodate for, let's say if we touch down on a very high spot. These plastics are never completely flat. Their thickness does vary a little bit. They're not bad, but they do vary a little bit. So if I come down on a high spot, I want to have a little more spring pressure to make sure that it will float down into the valleys and then be able to rise up over using that float that we have that's available to us with the spring float. Multi-pass, you may want to run 2 passes with this. If you're running multiple passes with a vacuum foot, you're not going to do pass depth. You're going to set that for pass copies, because it's still going to be using the foot to determine the depth. It's not going to be plunging deeper each time because you tell it to go deeper like you're routing without a foot. This is strictly just going to run it again. So that would be pass copies. Okay, so I've got this set right for everything that I'm going to do here. So I can do apply and exit. I could have hit the run job and it would have already started. Now I can go to the machine, either use the pendant, or I can come over here and press the play button at the top. I am going to zoom in using the F11 key to watch it a little more closely, and then we'll hit play from here. Okay, so now I can take this cutter out and it is already set for my 0 location. So next time, as long as I keep my micrometer in the right location, I'll be able to drop this in and go. So I'll show you what that looks like. So now I can go back to 0. And I'm ready for the next cutter to come in. If I drop that cutter back in, it's going to be flush exactly where it was before flush. Now what I'm going to be doing here is I'm running a different operation. I'm going to cut this out now. So I'm going to be using a 15 thousandths profile cutter. So I drop the profile cutter in here. I don't remember if it's zeroed or not, so I have to zero it. So I've got that flush. Tighten it back down, so it's zeroed. Now to cut through this material, I need to go 60 thousandths. So I'm on 0 right now, so I tighten this, and when I see 0 again, I'm at 25. I see 0 again, I'm at 50. Then I go 55 and 60. 60 thousandths. Alright, so now I can run my cutout. Okay, so we finished engraving the plastic with the text. Now we need to do the cutout. So we go into the F1 dialog, we go to color settings, we turn on the red, turn off the black, say OK. And in this case, we can actually use the same settings. Even though this is much deeper, we're using a bigger cutter, so it has a faster tip speed, which means it works even at this ½ inch per second speed that we have set here. So we can go ahead, apply and exit, and then we can hit, we see that our circle is showing there, and then we can hit the play button up the top or the play button on the pendant. Well, we'll zoom in. We'll go F11, and then we'll hit play. Now I've set this so that it wouldn't quite go all the way through, so that I could take the whole piece off because this has an adhesive back. Then I could take the whole piece off and then pop out what I engraved. Pop the center of it out. That's how it works. I could have put a sacrificial piece of material underneath and gone all the way through even into the sacrificial piece of material. When we're finished with the job, as usual, we close our EDI. We're back in our job, ready to set up a new job, run the next one.